If you had approached London in the year 1350, the first thing you would notice would not be the towers or the markets, but the river. The Thames moved slowly through the grey morning light, wide and restless, carrying barges loaded with timber, wool, grain and stone. The smell of wet wood, mud and smoke drifted across the water as boatmen shouted to one another while guiding their vessels toward the crowded wharves. From a distance, the city rose like a dark silhouette against the horizon. Tall wooden houses leaned over narrow streets, church towers pierced the skyline, and above it all stood the heavy stone walls that protected one of the most important cities in medieval England. But London in 1350 was a city living in the shadow of recent catastrophe. Just 2 years earlier, the Black Death had swept through the streets, killing nearly half the population. Entire households had vanished. Workshops had gone silent. Many houses still stood abandoned, their doors sealed or their windows dark. Yet the city was alive again. Merchants returned to their stalls. Bakers lit their ovens before sunrise. Apprentices carried goods through the gates while priests walked quietly toward early prayers. Life, stubborn and relentless, had begun to fill the empty spaces left by the plague. As you moved closer to the city gates, the noise grew louder. Carts rattled across the road. Horses stamped impatiently in the mud. Travellers waited their turn to enter through the narrow stone passage guarded by armed watchmen. Beyond those gates lay a city of contrasts. Crowded alleys and muddy markets stretched across most of London. But hidden behind thick walls and guarded courtyards stood another world entirely. The residences of the medieval nobility. Stone manors, private gardens, great halls lit by roaring fires. And inside those halls lived the powerful families who shaped the politics, wealth and future of the kingdom. To understand medieval London, you had to step beyond the streets and into their world. Once inside the city, the world of the medieval nobility revealed itself slowly, hidden behind thick walls and guarded gates. Unlike the crowded wooden houses that filled most of London's streets, noble residences were built from stone and timber, designed not only for comfort but also for authority. These homes were often arranged around private courtyards, separating the powerful families who lived inside from the noise and chaos of the city outside. A visitor passing through the gate would first enter the outer yard. Here the daily activity of the household unfolded. Stable hands cared for horses. Servants carried barrels of ale and baskets of food from nearby markets. Messengers arrived with letters sealed in wax bringing news from distant estates or from the royal court itself. Beyond this busy courtyard stood the heart of every noble residence, the Great Hall. The Great Hall was the centre of power within the house. It was a long, high-ceilinged room with massive wooden beams supporting the roof. Tall windows allowed narrow streams of light to fall across stone floors covered with rushes and woven mats. At one end of the hall stood a raised platform where the lord of the household sat during meals and gatherings. Here, status was visible to everyone. The lord and his closest family members sat at the high table, elevated above the rest of the room. Knights, trusted advisors, and honoured guests occupied nearby benches, while servants and lower-ranking members of the household stood farther away. Even the arrangement of seats reinforced the hierarchy that governed medieval society. Meals in the hall were grand occasions. Large platters of roasted meat, bread, and fish were carried in by servants moving quickly between the kitchens and the tables. Ale and wine flowed freely. Musicians sometimes played while stories were shared across the long tables. But the Great Hall was more than a place for eating. It was where decisions were made. Disputes between tenants might be settled here. Agreements with merchants could be negotiated. News from the king's court was discussed among trusted allies. Within these walls, noble families managed the land, wealth and political alliances that sustained their influence across the kingdom. Beyond the hall lay private chambers, smaller rooms reserved for the lord, his family and the most trusted members of the household. These spaces offered a rare luxury in medieval life: privacy. Fires burned in stone hearths. Tapestries hung along the walls to keep out the cold. Wooden chests held clothing, documents, and valuable objects brought from distant markets. Life here was comfortable compared to the crowded streets outside. Yet even within these walls, the power of the nobility was never separated from the wider world beyond the city. Because in medieval London, wealth did not come from the house itself. It came from land, or loyalty, and the networks of power that stretched far beyond the city gates. For the medieval nobility of London, power did not begin inside the city walls. It began in the countryside. Most noble families owned vast estates scattered across the English countryside, farms, villages, forests and grazing land that stretched for miles beyond the horizon. These lands produced the wealth that sustained their lives in the city. Grain from tenant farms, wool from sheep pastures, timber from forests, and rents paid by villagers all flowed toward the noble households that controlled them. London was not where their wealth was created. It was where their power was managed. Messengers arrived daily carrying reports from distant manors. Stewards kept careful records of harvests, taxes and livestock. Disputes between tenants or neighbouring lords were written down and brought to the attention of the noble household. The lord did not personally oversee every field or village. Instead, a network of loyal officials managed the estates in his name. Stewards supervised the finances of each manor. Bailiffs ensured that crops were harvested and rents collected. Reeves, local village leaders chosen from among the peasants, helped organise agricultural work and communicate the lord's orders to the community. Through this system, authority extended across hundreds of lives. But land alone did not guarantee power. Loyalty was just as important. Noble families maintained alliances with knights and other landowners who pledged their service in exchange for protection, status or land of their own. These relationships were often sealed through formal oaths or strengthened through marriage between powerful families. A noble household was therefore not only a family, it was a political network. Knights might live within the household itself, serving as both protectors and trusted companions. Others lived on nearby estates but remained ready to support their lord when called upon, whether to defend land, enforce justice, or join military campaigns. And above every noble family stood the authority of the king. The nobility owed their lands and titles to royal favour. In return, they were expected to provide taxes, loyalty and military support when the crown demanded it. Maintaining this balance between independence and loyalty was one of the greatest challenges of medieval politics. Because in 14th century England, their power was never absolute. It was constantly negotiated between kings, nobles, knights, and the communities that depended on them. And for the noble families living behind the walls of London, every decision made within their great halls could ripple outward across the fields, villages and roads of the entire kingdom. Despite their wealth and power, daily life for the medieval nobility was shaped by routines that balanced privilege with responsibility. A typical day in a noble household began early. As the first light crept over the rooftops of London, servants were already moving through the halls, lighting fires and preparing the morning meal. The lord of the house might wake to prayers led by a household chaplain, followed by a simple breakfast of bread, cheese and ale. Religion was woven deeply into noble life, and chapels existed within many noble residences, and daily prayer was considered both a personal duty and a public display of devotion. The belief that rulers governed with divine approval reinforced the authority of noble families and their position within society. But prayer was only the beginning of the day. Much of the morning was devoted to administration. The lord met with stewards and advisors to review messages from distant estates, discuss disputes among tenants, or plan alliances with other powerful families. Letters were dictated, sealed with wax, and sent along the roads leading out of London. Meanwhile, the household itself remained busy. Servants prepared food, cleaned chambers, maintained clothing, and ensured that the complex machinery of the residence ran smoothly. Noblewomen often oversaw many of these activities, managing servants and supervising supplies of food, textiles, and household goods. Afternoons could bring moments of leisure. Some nobles practiced hunting with hawks or trained for combat with swords and lances in nearby fields. Others entertained guests, listened to musicians, or played board games such as chess, which was popular among the educated elite. Yet even these moments of comfort existed within a fragile world. The memory of the Black Death still lingered in London streets. Political rivalries between noble families could erupt into violence, and loyalty to the crown could shift quickly in times of conflict. Behind the walls of their grand residences, the medieval nobility lived lives that appeared powerful and secure, but their world depended on delicate alliances, careful management of land and wealth, and the constant effort to maintain authority in a kingdom where fortunes could change as quickly as the winds over the Thames. For those who walked the halls of London's noble houses in 1350, power was both a privilege and a responsibility that shaped the fate of the entire realm.